Hello?
Hi.
Yeah, hi, how are you doing?
Good. How are you? Can you hear me well?
Yes, and can you hear me okay?
Hello, and welcome to the 68th episode of NEOHUMAN Podcast. I'm Agah Bahari, a Dogologist, on Twitter and Instagram, and you can follow the show on liveinlimbo.com, iTunes, YouTube, and BitChute. And today with me, I have a pleasure of having Peter Voss. Welcome to NEOHUMAN Podcast, Peter.
Thank you. Thanks for inviting me.
Yeah, you were the first ever recommended guest to come on NEOHUMAN Podcast by my dear friend David McFadden, who I believe used to work for you.
Yeah, absolutely. Yes. Right. Oh,
Yeah,
good.
it only took us 68 episodes to get to you, but I think this is a good place and good time to talk about a lot of different things in the context of intelligence and artificial intelligence. But let's start with your background, the work you've done, the lives you've lived, and what are you mainly focused on now these days?
Okay. Sure. Yeah, let me give you a rundown. Um, I actually didn't finish high school. So, personal circumstances. I started work at 16. Taught myself electronics, became an electronics engineer, started my own electronics company. Then I fell in love with software. Instant gratification. You have an idea and you can sit down for a few hours and you've got something that's working.
Mm-hmm.
As opposed to electronics, usually it takes a long time to build something. Anyway, I've really been involved with, software and programming for a long time now. I've built several technology platforms, including database engines and programming languages. I also built an ERP software system, built a company around that. That became very successful. We went from the garage to 400 people, did an IPO. So that was super exciting. Love to do that again. So it's when I exited that company, I had enough time and money on my hands to say, what big project do I want to tackle? And the obvious thing for me was, how can we build software, or how can we make software more intelligent? How can we build machines that can think and learn and reason the way humans do? So I took 5 years to study cognition, intelligence, actually much broader than that, even epistemology, theory of knowledge, different aspects of philosophy, ethics, and how do children learn? What do IQ tests measure? How is our intelligence different from animals? All of those different aspects to really deeply understand what cognition and intelligence is. And during that period, I basically came up with a design for an intelligence engine. So in 2001, I got together with some other people. We actually coined the term artificial general intelligence, AGI, in 2001, wrote a book on the topic. And that's when I started my first AI company, hired about 12 people. David was one of our early contributors, and basically for several years we were in R&D mode, taking my ideas and turning them into various prototypes, experimenting around, building sort of animal models of intelligence, how children learn, and then eventually over the years we developed a platform that we could commercialize. In 2008, we then launched a commercial company to use our technology to make automated call center calls more pleasant and more intelligent. At the moment when you call into a company and you talk to a robot, people just hate that.
Yeah.
Press 0 to get to an operator because they're so awful. So in Smart Action, we offer basically a much better system, something that you can speak to in normal English. It remembers what you said earlier in the conversation. So it's just a better, better experience. However, I found that running that company, I got bogged down in with scalability, reliability, security issues, normal engineering issues that were really taking up all of my time, HIPAA compliance, PCI compliance, all of those kinds of things. So I exited the company 7 years ago. to concentrate on getting back to cranking up the intelligence to take it, to the next level. And that's when I formed the current company, Igo.ai. Again, hired a team of about 12 people. And for several years, we were in stealth mode, no customers, just concentrating on the core technology and making it more intelligent. Because human level intelligence is just, it's a really, really hard problem to solve with current hardware and software technology that we have. So we're still quite a long way away from being at human level, but the idea is to have the right fundamental architecture, to have the fundamentally right approach that allows you to keep getting smarter and smarter systems. So that's what we've been concentrating on. And then last year we actually then started commercializing our second generation of the technology, and we're just in the midst now of, we signed up some great customers, and we, now fully commercial again. But this time around, I want to make sure that while we pursue our commercial expansion, we continue actually also keeping a strong development team so that we don't get trapped, just putting all of our energy into the commercial business and not really continuing to work on, increasing, getting closer and closer to human level.
Would it make the software available as open source would, in a way, solve that problem that you can have contributors from all around the world?
Mm-hmm. Yeah, we've certainly thought about that. There are a number of challenges in that. We've seen, for example, Ben Goertzel's project, OpenCog, and it's actually very hard to get people to work on an AGI project open source because it's a really long-term kind of thing. It's not easily divisible, and it requires, well, certainly in our approach, I found that, most of the people we have on the team now have been with us 3, 4, 5 years, and it really takes a long time to get your head around this different approach that we have, a cognitive architecture, to really learn the difficulties, the complexities of working with the system. So you really need to be dedicated to it full time and have a long-term view, or have somebody paying your bills.
Mm-hmm.
And the other thing I found, it's very difficult to do it remotely. Again, because we have a lot of every day we have brainstorming sessions, in terms of how do we solve this problem, and it's I don't think it's impossible to do it remotely, but it's just very hard, I think. Of course, right now, this week we have everyone working from home, and we don't know how long that's going to last, but it's definitely impacting communication and productivity, in some way. So they are constraints. Then, of course, the other thing with open source, you really make it that much more difficult to attract funding for a project. And clearly this is a long-term project that will require more funding. I've been funding it from basically my previous endeavors, but my pockets are only so deep, so
yeah.
I've been able to afford to have 12 people, but you're not going to solve human level AGI with 12 people, I don't think. So it's attracting investment, building a commercial company, and all of that, and plus all the other reasons I mentioned. I don't think that open source is feasible.
Mm-hmm.
Now, having said that, we did actually very seriously investigate the year before last, going the blockchain route. Obviously, when that was all the fashion, and people were raising a lot of money with that way. So I think there is a viable path once we get to a certain level of funding and size, that similar to Wikipedia, we could have a set of contributors that are domain experts, in how to help people manage stress, or teach mathematics, or whatever it might be, where they could then teach our AI, our Igo, they could teach Igo how to do these things. So you would have, like Wikipedia, basically lots of contributors contributing to the central knowledge base, Now, of course, with the blockchain idea, the whole thing was that contributors would then get paid, in tokens and IGO tokens, for whoever uses that particular skill they taught IGO. But that effort would still have taken quite a bit of money to build the infrastructure, the platform, to a point where people can make those kinds of contributions, and we're not there yet. Our tools and documentation and the infrastructure really isn't at a place where we could have thousands or tens of thousands of people, teaching our system additional things. But that is ultimately a path that we may well get back to. I hope we can get back to.
Yeah, I was going to ask, because as far as I understand, Ben Goertzel's argument for Singularity Net, which is a decentralized blockchain-oriented platform for artificial intelligence, is to create the AGI ultimately as a result of millions and millions of narrow AIs that are not owned by any central structure of authority. And that seems to be the biggest danger for us right now going into this. Who knows what kind of a decade this is going to be on the back of technological progress. But the idea that, let's say, the Chinese Communist Party is going to own the most powerful AI, or Google, or the US government, it's a terrifying kind of prospect.
Right. Yeah, there are many things that, from what you mentioned. So first of all of my research indicates very strongly that a collection of narrow AIs will never be AGI.
Oh, okay. So this is fundamentally different route than Ben Goertzel's with Singularity Net. Okay.
Correct. I don't believe it's possible. It's sort of, somewhere. I mean, it's obviously not a simple debate, and Ben's a smart guy, and I don't know how much he believes that the society of open AI, or whether it's just kind of what makes sense to have to do right now, because he actually had a much more highly integrated. His approach was actually much more similar to ours originally with OpenCog. That basically there was a central system, that a knowledge graph that had all of the skills, sort of in a tightly coupled, highly integrated manner. Whereas if you have thousands of different AI developers developing little narrow AIs, how do they communicate? How do you decide, well, basically, I'm convinced that that's not going to lead to AGI. So that's the one thing. So I think fundamentally, I mean, it may be good to have a marketplace for AGI algorithms, but then you're competing with, Microsoft and IBM and Google, who already have these, APIs where they're providing, narrow AI APIs, basically, microservices. So I haven't studied, the current system enough to see what benefits it could provide, but certainly I don't think it's the right path to AGI. Now, as far as a single government also having AGI, it's a fairly complex argument, and we don't really know enough about the dynamics of AI. You get, for example, you get OpenAI, where the CEO of OpenAI made a strong statement where he says all we need is more data and more processing power, and I guess that's how they got $1 billion from Microsoft. Or, well, I don't know how much of it they got, because most of that money, I think, will go right back to Microsoft as basically credits.
And apparently it's only a commercial wing of it. The whole thing's supposed to be nonprofit.
Yeah. So, a lot of question marks there. But yeah, I'm sure a lot of that $1 billion was actually just credits for Microsoft cloud services. But be that as it may, the point that I really want to make here is that he firmly believes, or at least firmly states, that all we need for AGI is more data and more processing power. I think it's completely, utterly wrong. It's sort of the argument of having, if 1 million monkeys can't write Shakespeare, 1 billion monkeys aren't going to write Shakespeare either. Obviously, again, there's subtle arguments, and so on, but I firmly believe, for a number of reasons, and I've written quite a lot about this on medium.com. I have a lot of articles of why the current deep learning, machine learning approach cannot lead to artificial general intelligence or real intelligence. It's fundamentally a dead end. It's a wrong path. So throwing more data and more processing power is not going to solve the problem. So if you believe that more data and more processing power will solve the problem, then of course it's much more concerning that a government would basically have, the most powerful AI. I don't believe that. I believe there is. I'm not saying that processing power ultimately isn't going to be important, but I also believe there will probably be an optimum size of processor beyond which you really want to decentralize. You want to have, multiple AIs. So, it's sort of similar saying, instead of having 1,000 smart PhD level people working on a problem, you just want one Einstein with an IQ of 1,000. And I think there are trade-offs. Obviously, you want the highest level of IQ, but above a certain level, your increased IQ is probably less important than the diversity of approaches that are being tried. Sort of having a community of AIs that can chip away at different problems. Now, if the right architecture for AGI becomes generally available, I think it will actually be feasible for a much wider range of institutions and companies and individuals to have AGI, so that it won't be as centralized. So that's one reason why I'm less concerned about this sort of winner-take-all scenario. But there's another much more controversial thesis sort of that I have, and that is that I believe increased intelligence will actually lead to improved morality.
Why is it controversial?
Well, pretty much every time I say that, people will say, wasn't Hitler very smart, or some comment like that.
Oh my God.
So I think that if politicians got AIs as advisors, I think they would actually make better decisions, less evil decisions, because they would, and the example I often give is in terms of things we do that are really bad or immoral that turn out to be, maybe that wasn't the best thing to do. A good example here is with today, I think most people would agree, America, how America responded to 9/11 instead of, and just zooming down on Afghanistan and invading Iraq. Maybe wasn't the best thing to do, the smartest thing, and sort of what are the limitations in humans? Why do we do things that are wrong or bad or immoral, that are basically detrimental to us? Well, there are three reasons. There are probably more than, but three major reasons. The one is we tend to respond emotionally. With 9/11, well, we've got to hit out at somebody. Somebody is at fault. We've got to get back at somebody. So it's that emotional response, which is not always the best thing. The second thing is we don't really work with adequate information. We don't. It's not easy for us to get right information. We don't have the patience. We're not very good at it. Whereas an AI will be able to have work with much better information. Were they really weapons of mass destruction? Well, I think with a little bit of research, it wouldn't have been that difficult to figure out. No, that wasn't an issue. That was just an excuse. And then the third thing related to that is we are just not very good at rational thinking. Evolution didn't really equip us to yes, we are the rational animal relative to animals. We're rational, but relative to what rationality could and should and could be. We're not actually very good at that. So if you have an AI advisor that over time has proven itself to give you good advice, as an individual, as a politician, as a whatever, and it would then say, well, hang on, just wait a minute here. what is the best way to respond to the 9/11 thing? Maybe there's a better way of achieving your objectives. What are you actually trying to achieve? Maybe there's a better way of achieving your objectives than invading Iraq and sending all your troops to Afghanistan. So I actually firmly believe that having this highly intelligent, rational advisor, objective advisor, will actually make people make better decisions and basically become more moral, because the two are related.
Now, just off the top of my head, I can think of two arguments against what you said. Mm-hmm. One
right.
would be what Elon Musk is saying, that you ask an AI to, for example, get rid of germs, and the best solution it will come up with is that to get rid of humans, all of them together, and there will be no germs. So that's one thing. The second thing is, what is the scale for us to evaluate these terms like better, worse, right or wrong, especially when we are dealing with a different type of intelligence? That the argument is that the alignment issue will remain our biggest challenge, that we don't know that the goals we have as humanity, which itself is debatable, that have we agreed upon certain set of goals that we are pursuing? Are they going to be shared by AI? And if not, is there any way for us to be able to coexist rather than merging with it?
Yeah. So, I love these questions. Obviously, those are the obvious objections. So the first one you mentioned is sort of the paperclip argument, is that, which I think is a pathetic argument, quite frankly. And I'm appalled that so many smart people have fallen into that. So it's basically, the argument boils down to, you have this super intelligence that's so smart that it can outfox the whole of humanity, and pave over the world with paperclips or whatever, or wipe out humans, and we can't stop it. So that's how smart it is. It can outsmart all of us combined. Yet it's not smart enough to figure out that that's not really what you wanted it to do. I mean, it makes no sense. Any AI that we build, one of the first things we do, and I mean, we do that right now with with IGO. One of the most important things is you want your AI to understand what you wanted to do, and that's an iterative process. It's not a line of code that you say, I want paper clips, or right. Kill all viruses. It's and I think it's, you have too many mathematicians and programmers basically involved in this field of AI safety that have really no relationship to cognitive psychology or even common sense or philosophy. That's not how you're going to build an AI, that you're going to be hard coding, a few lines of code, I want paper clips, or, give it has to have a whole lot of common sense, knowledge, reasoning ability, background for it to do anything useful for you. So it has to, one of the things it has to be able to do is to figure out, to ask you to interact with you. I mean, it's like hiring somebody. Would you hire a contractor and give him $1 billion and say, hey, build me a house, and okay, you're not telling them where you want it or why you want it, what you want to do with it, or what constraints there are. And, if the contractor doesn't ask you and he just says, okay, I'll take your $1 billion, I'll build your house,
Right, but the contractor is working for you to get that $1 billion. What is the incentive for the AI to do what you want it to do rather than just pursue its own goals, which goes back to the alignment issue?
Yeah, okay. So, that's the other thing. Well, I think the problem there is that people assume that the AI will have an agenda of its own. It won't. The fundamental agendas we have are basically from our reptile brain. It's basically to, our selfish gene, to further our selfish gene, or to rape and pillage,
right.
That's really what drives us, and this is why we have egos and all of those good things. Now, there is no reason that we would build an AI that would have a reptile brain. I mean, there may be some researchers say, I want an AI that is just as irrational as humans are, so I'll give it a reptile brain. But that would actually be, first of all, not many people would do that because, you're commercially driven. You don't want the thing to turn around and bite you. So, but, first of all, there'd be very few of those instances where somebody actually builds one. So you have a lot more good cops than bad cops in that regard. But secondly, they're going to be much less efficient because they're going to suffer irrationalities that they're going to act out of their reptile brain responses, and they're going to be less effective, basically. So no, AIs are not going to inherently have their own agenda. They will be built specifically to do what we want them to do. I mean, that's what we're building, and that's the hardest thing to get the thing. Not that it wants to do its own thing. It's just the most likely failure scenario by far, by orders of magnitude, is that the thing won't work properly. It'll have a bug and crash and be stupid. That's a much harder problem. People just a lot of these sort of AI safety experts assume that getting intelligence will be the easy part, and that alignment will be the hard part. No, it's exactly the opposite way around. Getting to AI, getting an AI that actually understands, that can learn, that can reason, that's the hard part. And in building such a system that can actually do useful things for us, an inherent byproduct, an essential byproduct, or prerequisite, I think I should say, is that it actually understands what you want. And no, it's not going to have an agenda of its own. There's no reason that it would have that.
Is DeepMind closer to your perspective? Because my understanding is that their mission statement is solve intelligence and then solve everything as a consequence of it.
Yeah, I totally agree with their mission statement. I wish I had their resources. I think they're fundamentally on the wrong track with deep learning, machine learning, and I think they already acknowledge that. Demis Hassabis, if you listen to his, to his presentations that he gives, he says, we have, deep learning has this problem, this problem, this problem, this problem. These are the problems we need to solve in order to get intelligence. And I haven't heard him really give any answers, that he has any answers, just that we need to keep chipping away at it. And I think it seems that they're also spending putting a lot of effort into understanding how the brain works to try and find answers to those problems. Now, I think they're looking under the wrong tree or bush or whatever. I think because of the success they've had with deep learning, machine learning in those narrow applications, obviously being able to beat the world Go champion is, phenomenal. Who would have thought 10 years ago that we'd be able to do that? That was kind of an unsolved AI problem. But all the problems they've been tackling are narrow AI problems, and they don't fundamentally address the requirements of intelligence. But they've got 600 or whatever PhD level people that are experts at mathematics, statistics, machine learning, deep learning, data science, and so on. Those are not the right skills to solve intelligence. You first have to understand what cognition is. So you really need to be a cognitive psychologist to first understand what intelligence is, what it entails, not some mathematical sort of, formulation of intelligence, which is kind of the approach they have. And then you need to say, well, once we have a list of what are the essentials that intelligence requires, then your research needs to be focused, your development needs to be focused on addressing those problems and not addressing problems that, will maybe impress people, and maybe some breakthrough in AI, or may beat some AI benchmark or so, because what everybody in AI is doing is narrow AI. So putting more effort into getting better at narrow AI isn't going to help you build AGI.
Right, you're just going to have better narrow AIs, basically.
Correct.
Right.
Yeah.
Now, obviously, based on what you were saying, this is an incredibly complex kind of a problem, and approaching it is very important too. How it's being approached. As you said, 600 PhD, it's not enough necessarily to fix the problem. I want to read some headlines, all of them following the same topic.
Right.
These are what people are getting their image of AI based on, and get your reaction. Guardian has said disastrous lack of diversity in AI industry perpetuates bias based on a study. Fortune has said how to fix artificial intelligence's diversity crisis. I did not know that we have diversity crisis in artificial intelligence. AI Authority, 5 ways artificial intelligence bring diversity to the modern workplace. MIT, using artificial intelligence to promote diversity. IBM has a paper, the role of AI in mitigating bias to enhance diversity and inclusion. There is a think tank called diversity.ai, a think tank for inclusive artificial intelligence. And Wired has a magazine that AI is the future, but where are the women? And making the argument that just 12% of machine learning researchers are women, a worrying statistic for a field supposedly reshaping society. Are these really what we need to focus on? And R&D is just a waste of resources and really educating the people, because at the end of the day, all of these technology work as well as the society that adopts it.
Yeah, sorry, I've got a phone ringing.
It's all good.
Okay, no more. All right. So, yeah, I mean, they're obviously the kind of things that, sort of moral posturing, that people can say, how terrible is this and how terrible is that? Well, I can tell you first of all, we have a lot of women on our team, excellent cognitive psychologists. We call them AI psychologists, who are linguists and cognitive psychologists. Who do a fantastic job.
And I assume they were not hired because they were women.
Not at all.
Yeah, exactly.
Not at all. They were hired because they were the best candidates, And so there's such a shortage of talent in the deep learning, machine learning field. I very much doubt that there's a huge barrier for women getting into the field. Now, are there problems in terms of management structures and old boys clubs and sexual harassment and so on? Absolutely, there are problems, but they're not unique to AI or machine learning. In fact, I think they probably much less than in other more established industries. So, that's kind of the one thing. Now, as far as bias in algorithms is concerned, well, yes, of course, if the data you're feeding into the system, it has is from a certain demographic or has certain, whatever, incarceration, if, the wrong people were incarcerated and that's what you train the system with, yeah, it's gonna be wrong. But to me, that's an engineering problem. It's basically, the algorithm isn't working the way it should be working, and you need to fix it. Mm-hmm. It's not like a big moral thing that deep learning is bad. It's like whether you have an expert system, whether you have a manual system that people go through a checklist of, who to give credit for, or who to lock up, or whatever. It's a bug in the system, and you should fix the bug.
Yeah, it just seems that it's judging ethics and judging something that is beyond ethics and morality, using ethics and morality. And I think this is important also to talk about. You said our ethics and morality in large part is coming from our lizard brain. One of the questions that I keep asking technologists, philosophers, thinkers who I have in the show, whether or not ethics and reality are objective or subjective to begin with. And if they're not objective, then how are we going to pin it down to something that we can implement within the machine?
Right. Well, in fact, yes, I guess that's the other part of the question you asked me earlier in terms of what morality do we imbue our system with, with the alignment problem and because different people. And yes, I find that absolutely shocking that, tens of millions of dollars or maybe hundreds of millions by now are going to, AI safety type of organizations and so on. And, I've had quite a bit of contact with them, been to conferences and so on. And you ask these people, okay, what is morality? Can you define it? How do you actually decide right from wrong? And they're completely silent. They're completely stumped by that question. So, here they're talking about we have to program our system with morality, which makes no sense to me anyway, that you can program it. But even if you could, what morality, if you don't believe morality is something objective, then what are you fighting for even? What's the basis of your whole organization in terms of what, if you can't define what's good and what's bad? Now, I do firmly believe that morality could be, objective. That the right morality is objective. And again, I have some fairly long articles on medium.com about that. And it's, you basically have to say, why do we need morality? What is the purpose of having morality in the first place? And that kind of immediately gives you the goal. The reason we have morality is, or should be, not that we go to heaven, or that we conform to some dictator, but that we optimize individual human life, that we optimize flourishing. And then you can debate, is it the greatest good for the greatest number or so? And I think there are very good arguments why no, it should be individual flourishing rather than, aggregate flourishing. Because if you can have a system where each individual can optimize their flourishing, that includes the community that you're part of and as a whole. I mean, these are not arguments, one can get through in a few sentences.
Yeah.
But that's sort of the conclusion I've reached. So if human flourishing is the goal, the purpose we have morality, or why we should have morality, then it actually becomes objective, because you can say, well, what is involved in flourishing? And flourishing is, well, the obvious things is you want good physical health. That's part of flourishing. You want mental health, well-being, and emotional well-being, and then of course also sort of material well-being as part of it.
Resources, right?
Yeah, resources. So once you have that, and now the details of what exactly. What resources might be important, or what kind of life somebody wants to lead, there's very specifics, but there's actually a lot of overlap in what flourishing is. There are a lot of things you can subtract. Basically, if you are ill, physically ill, well, that's not optimal. So, that you can, and mentally as well, if you are distressed, if you are depressed, or, just not able to think clearly or properly, then that's negative. So we kind of know what the negatives are, where non-flourishing is. And then you can basically build, you can figure out what are the principles that you need to live by. And those are basically your moral principles, which you then automatize. As you practice them, you automatize, and they become your virtues, your characteristics of what you normally do. So to give an example, is lying a good thing in principle, or is being truthful basically beneficial to achieve, on average, not in every particular instance, but on average. Once you come to that conclusion, if you start living that way, especially not lying to yourself.
Yes, that's the biggest challenge and the biggest outcome that it can achieve.
Yeah, it has to start by yourself, because if you say, I'm really such a good person and so honest and so generous, or I'm so smart, or I'm so productive, or whatever, and if that isn't true, then reality is going to impinge on you.
Absolutely.
And that undermine your ability to optimize your life. So it's basically these moral principles, I think, are objective, that will help people optimize lives. So yeah, I believe that morality should be objective, but again, the AI safety community doesn't seem to even have begun to address that problem.
They're just like money, raising money, using excuses. It seems like, I don't know. I totally agree with you.
Obviously, I've met a lot of people, and they genuine people. They really genuinely believe there is a huge problem. I mean, many of them, that there's a real problem, a real threat. and they're actually dedicating their lives. I mean, not everybody's making a lot of money out of that.
Right.
And if they really believe that, I think they're just misguided in so many ways.
Your approach sounds very stoic to me, approach to AI. Even when you mentioned earlier that electronics, you said, well, it's taking a long time. You're just going to focus on software program. It reminded me of, I had a William Irvin, who's a stoic writer on the show, and he said that he had a midlife crisis around 40, and he was very attracted to Zen. But then he found Stoicism. It's like, well, with Zen, you have to practice for years. It might work, it might not work. Stoicism, you can just focus on it over a weekend and you get a result. It's very interesting. I'm totally down with an Stoic AI.
Yeah. I'm not sure how far it would take Stoicism, but I mean, I've spent the last 20 plus years, more like 25 years now, really pursuing AI and AGI, and I couldn't imagine what I'd rather be doing. I mean, it's the most exciting thing in the world. I'm also, just through my background, my interest, and really understanding hardware design and language design and software design, and having a real interest in psychology and philosophy, I'm sort of, I feel that I'm ideally suited to working on it. That I really believe that this understanding of philosophy, epistemology in particular, what is knowledge, how do we know anything, the importance of concepts, and how do we form concepts, and I mean, abstract concepts are the key to human intelligence. But again, it's understanding intelligence, understanding cognition has to be a prerequisite for building artificial intelligence.
How would you define intelligence so far based on what you've gathered and what you have learned?
Yeah, there isn't a concise description. I mean, I somewhere in my writings I do have a sort of a 1 or 2 sentence description, but it's really a description rather than a definition. But it's the ability to learn. Learn is important. Learn to solve new problems in real time with constrained resources.
Mm-hmm. And is IQ is a reliable measurement for that?
Not entirely. My study of IQ, I was actually involved in helping to develop a new psychometric test that doesn't have the same cultural bias as a lot of existing IQ tests have. And one of the things I learned from there that the most important subcomponent of intelligence that really identifies which people are able to solve many different problems, that basically are, able, whether they emotionally are doing it or whatever, but they're able to solve problems, is the component of metacognition. And that's basically a conscious or subconscious, mainly subconscious ability to know what a mental approach you need to take to solve a particular problem. Because, we have the ability to think logically, we have the ability to think abstractly, to use our intuition, to rely on memory or more or less, and so on. So metacognition is basically when you come across a problem that you choose the right tools, the right mental tools to pursue the problem, to basically not go down the road of trying to solve something methodically, logically, if the problem is not of a kind that can be solved that way, that need to be solved more intuitively, and vice versa.
So is it being creative?
That's part of it, but not the main part of it. I don't think intelligence necessitates creativity. I think they somewhat on different dimensions. No, it's basically using the right mental tools for the job. That is one of the key differences between people who have high IQ and are competent, generally mentally competent, highly competent, that they tend to use the right methodology and not get stuck in the wrong methodology.
Considering, I'm sorry.
Just kind of one of the insights from studying IQ. But yeah, IQ is not the the only thing that really tells you whether somebody is intelligent or not. But it's also quite useful.
Well, just this topic seems to be so controversial that the moment you start to delve a little deep into it, everybody talk about, well, you can't really talk about like dividing people based on intelligence on the basis of, let's say, race or culture or country, because the argument can be made that just look at whatever culture that we have right now in the world and how they have evolved to become what they are, and obviously it must have been a greater intelligence behind building a city like Tokyo compared to somewhere else that is not very pleasant, for example, or productive. So have you found or come across any kind of a challenge in the sense that, again, going back to making ethical and moral kind of an argument against something that is incredibly practical and important to studying intelligence and understanding it?
Yeah, so it's a pity that that studying intelligence and differences of intelligence has become, like third rail or whatever. You basically you can't study it basically. Unless you claim that there are these multiple intelligences and everybody is equally intelligent, just in a different way. And I kind of say, well, yeah, there's that person who's really, he's got a very high rating in wife-beating intelligence, whatever. I'm sure you can find something.
Yeah.
If you want to make sure that everybody has an IQ of 140 in something. No, it's quite ridiculous that you can't really study it. But it's also, it's not that super important, I think. There's certainly, there's so many flaws in the educational system, first of all. There's so many problems with people who are smart but just emotionally aren't equipped or don't have the discipline or whatever. There's so many different components involved. So ultimately, artificial intelligence, or AGI, of course, in many ways will very rapidly exceed, already, of course, narrow AI exceeds human capabilities in so many ways. So artificial intelligence, AGI, will, of course, be so much more powerful in so many ways, but it will struggle with, some of the things that are easy for us, for humans, and those are going to be the hardest problems to solve. But when you said, I think you also asked me about sort of, have I had resistance? Absolutely, I have people claiming, well, there is no such thing as AGI, artificial general intelligence, and I actually chose the general, I was particularly happy with calling it AGI, artificial general intelligence, actually referring to the little g in cognitive psychology, in intelligence, because I do believe that the general learning ability is the key to AGI. And it's a learning ability, the ability to learn new things in real time. And there's a confusion between when people say, well, surely deep learning is learning. These are learning systems, and you can't say they don't learn. Well, there's a huge difference between collecting a massive amount of data, tagging the data, number crunching it, and building a model that gets deployed, but as a read-only model, essentially.
Don't understand it.
It doesn't understand, but it also cannot learn interactively.
Right.
So the key to intelligence is it needs to be able to learn and understand. It needs to be able to understand and learn. What we do and what an AGI needs to be able to do is when we hear or see something, we make sense of it straight away. If we see something that doesn't make sense, we might look around to kind of, okay, well, what does this mean, or focus or whatever. If we hear something that doesn't make sense, we might ask for clarification, or we might think about it. Hey, well, what did I just hear? What does the person mean? And you might think about it, and okay, that's what they mean. So whatever we perceive, we make sense of it, and we integrate that information so it's available to be used. Just to show you, just to kind of demonstrate how pathetically limited these current chatbot systems are, and these are developed by multi-billion-dollar companies. I think Amazon has 10,000 people working on Alexa, and I mean, that massive amounts of money being thrown at them. But you take a very simple sentence, just 5, 6 words, my sister's cat, Spock, is pregnant. Any 5-year-old child will be able to make sense of it. I'm speaking, Peter's speaking, I have a sister, my sister has a cat, the cat's name is Spock. You think it's probably male from the name, you hear it's pregnant, you now know it's female. A 5-year-old child will have no problem integrating that information, and now the next sentence might be, she's really big, because she's pregnant, or next week you might ask, have the kittens arrived, and you can make sense of it. The current chatbots like, Alexa, Siri, or any of them, I don't have a hope in hell of even beginning to understand that, to learn that. Something as simple as that. That's how fundamentally flawed their approach is, by, building the model and then deploying a read-only model that cannot learn new facts interactively, that cannot reason about them, cannot integrate them into its existing knowledge, can't ask for clarification if it doesn't understand. They have none of those cognitive capabilities. So, that's a dead end. It's a road to nowhere as far as intelligent systems are concerned.
And these are the cutting edge models of what is happening in the field.
By the big companies, yeah.
So considering that, what do you think about Elon Musk's Neuralink and the argument that the only way that we can basically survive what's coming is by merging with artificial intelligence?
Yeah. So, that's kind of an interesting approach. So, first of all, a little bit tongue-in-cheek, I say, well, we're going to have real AI from machine AI, hardware-based AI, way before we ever have intelligence augmentation, which is basically what they're talking about. And the knockdown argument is just 3 letters, FDA. I mean,
goes back to government ruining everything.
Yeah, I mean, to have anything like that approved,
right,
will take centuries, But that's a bit tongue-in-cheek. No, I think while there are, obviously important applications that will be useful for that, that's not a path to AGI at all, because the bandwidth at which we can receive things and transmit things is so much lower than a hardware-based AI can, and messing with our wetware is just incredibly hard and risky. So no, that's not the way to AGI. And so what I do see, though, is that we will have personal assistants that are so closely coupled, psychologically coupled to us, that they become basically our exocortex. So it's not that we can enhance our wetware. I think that's just way too hard. But that we can extend our minds, our brain, our wetware through external devices, but that will be, psychologically closely coupled to us. And the way I see that working out is basically similar to, people who've been married for a long time or whatever. They, at a certain point, they don't really remember or care whose idea something was, it's sort of, and it's just a psychological coupling. So in a similar way, if you have we actually call it a personal assistant. Mm-hmm. We trademarked that name because the word personal is so important for like 3 different meanings of the word personal. First of all, personal in that you own it. So it's owned by you and it serves your purpose, not some mega corporation's purpose. Secondly, it's personalized to you. So, it's not a one-size-fits-all. It knows your particular goals, your history, and so on. And the third personal is that it's personal in the sense of private, that you decide what it shares with whom. So once you have this personal assistant that you interact with all the time, initially think of it, like a Siri or something, but just much smarter. And you ask it for advice or ask it to look up something and it gives you a result. And, initially it will be, oh yeah, my ego, recommended that I buy these stocks, or that I take this job, or take this treatment, or whatever. But after a while, as you interact with it, you won't really even remember or care whether it was your decision or the AI's decision. It'll just be part of you. Mm-hmm. So I see that way of us extending, of having an exocortex, of extending our mental capacity much more feasible than trying to hack our wetware.
Do you have a time frame for something like that?
I actually believe we have the hardware technology exists in principle. I think software technology exists in principle. I think it just needs quite a few people working on it. I think if there was focused effort to AGI with the right team and the right architecture, I think we could have human level intelligence in 7 years.
Wow.
Yeah,
That's amazing. It's also amazing because Aubrey de Grey was on Joe Rogan, and he said that next huge breakthrough with respect to aging is coming between 5 to 7 years. And he said that the change is coming overnight, because the moment that people can say, hey, we have the possibility of living, 200 years, then the expectation change, and then the policy has to change with it. Then policymakers are incredibly slow. So that was his biggest concern. Do you see the same kind of risk? Because I see this coronavirus, the way that it exponentially grew, a very good example about how AI can, for example, spread, and how AI can grow, or anything that has anything to do with exponential growth, and how people are unprepared for it because we can't even fathom this exponential growth.
Yeah. Oh, absolutely. It will happen with AI. Because once you get to a certain level where it becomes clear that this is really something different, once you get to a point where right now our AI, the level where we are, and we typically say if Siri and Alexa have an IQ of 10, not that IQ is the right measure, but if they're at 10, we're at 25 or 30, still a long way from human level. Right now, if I let our AI loose on Wikipedia, and I'm not talking about some statistical big data, which IBM and all of them, feed the whole of Wikipedia in, but there's no understanding of it. It just picks up certain correlations, and it might be able to answer certain questions, but it doesn't really understand or integrate what it reads. Currently, if we let our system loose on Wikipedia, it might be able to read or understand 10 or 15% of the text that's there, which isn't really enough to kind of bootstrap itself. But at a point when, our system, IGO, or some other AI, can actually read text like that and then ask a human for clarification. Hey, can you explain this to me? This doesn't make sense to me. Can you point me in the right direction? And you can have that kind of self-learning, assisted self-learning, that truly understands and integrates the knowledge that it acquires. Then things can happen very, very quickly. And so there's a certain, takeoff point, escape velocity, or whatever, in terms of acceptance of AI. And then, of course, unlimited funds will be available. And then everybody will want one. Everybody will work on it. Similar to how everybody jumped on deep learning, machine learning. It exploded exponentially over just a few years, and really limitless funds really became available for deep learning, machine learning. But once the real AI, hits that inflection point where people say, "Hey, this stuff looks like it's really going to work," then things can happen very quickly. Will people be unprepared for that? Absolutely.
Peter, what is next for you, and where can our audience follow your work?
So, our website is igo.ai, and we have links to articles and so on. So we've just launched commercially at the moment. Our focus is on getting more customers, and we're targeting large enterprise companies that are trying to offer a much better conversational AI experience, a hyper-personalized sort of concierge service. There are many, many different applications, whether it's your in-car experience, whether it's a robot in a hospital or a hotel, whether it's a gaming coach that helps you teach you how to be a better gamer, whether it's for diabetes management, whether it's for retail company that wants to offer you a personalized, chatbot basically with a brain, chatbot with a brain. So there are many, many different applications wherever conversational AI is involved. So that's obviously our big focus now. We're also trying to raise more money. As I say, my pockets aren't deep enough to scale the company quickly. So we're looking for the right kind of investors who really believe in the strategy that we have, the power of general intelligence and where that's leading. So that's where we are. I think there's one thing I haven't mentioned that might be also useful to just talk about briefly, and that is, where does our approach fit in? Because clearly, just from what I've said, it's not deep learning, it's not machine learning. DARPA actually have a useful way of looking at it. They've been presenting what they call the third wave of AI. So they talk about 3 waves of AI, and they actually have a fund to fund the third wave of AI. And what they mean by the 3 waves of AI is the first wave is basically good old-fashioned AI. It's all the stuff that was done for decades in AI, mainly logic-based systems, expert systems, formal logic, flowchart type approaches, and some statistics and so on. So that's the first wave. And then the second wave, of course, hit us like a tsunami about 7-8 years ago. That's all about deep learning, machine learning. And of course, there's now a whole generation of people, when you talk about AI, that's the only thing they actually even know about in AI. Of course, it's machine learning, deep learning, it's big data. But the third wave that DARPA has identified is basically adaptive systems that can learn and understand and reason in real time. And I identify that as what I call a cognitive architecture. So your architecture inherently has all of the components required for intelligence, such as real-time learning, reasoning, common sense reasoning, short-term memory, long-term memory, and the ability to disambiguate and to focus and have goal-directed behavior, and all of the different essentials of intelligence, that your architecture inherently has components for that, but they also have to be put together in a certain way. But that's sort of a whole another topic. But that's the third wave of AI, is basically a cognitive architecture.
Are there any other individuals, companies who are approaching it similar to the way that you are seeing it?
There have been cognitive architectures have been around for quite a while. Unfortunately, they've now all been cut off basically in the last 5-10 years. I had a brilliant intern from Germany working on our system. He really understood the cognitive approach and the engineering side of it and so on. He went back to Germany to do his PhD. He couldn't find a sponsor for cognitive architecture. So people are saying, well, cognitive architectures, we've been trying them for 30 years, they haven't worked, What they don't realize is that 10 years ago, if you said, I'm using a neural network to solve this problem, they say, neural networks, we've tried those for 30 years and they haven't worked,
Right.
So things don't work until they do work, sometimes.
Yeah.
So, so no, I don't actually know. I mean, there's some university projects, a few small projects, one-man shows and so on, but basically you can't get funding for it, you can't get paid, you can't get any love for this approach. So as far as I know, we're the only company that's actually, put 15 years of effort into it. We've already commercialized our first generation, and we've been consistently developing this and commercializing it. I'm not aware of any other company that actually has a commercial cognitive architecture.
Yeah, the status quo seems to be a problem. I was talking to a friend of mine who's a physicist, and he was saying at some point all the funding was going to string theory. If you were doing anything other than string theory, they had no interest in it whatsoever. It's
exactly the same thing. Yeah, and Aubrey de Grey, of course, has sort of the similar problem. Nanotechnology, of course, also kind of suffers that sort of lack of love. Then when people cottoned onto nanotechnology and how wonderful it was, and suddenly it turned into material science. But if you're trying to do real molecular nanotech, you can't get funding for that either.
Man, I should have you back and talk about futurism for another hour, but I know your time is limited. Right. Before I ask you the last question, we talked about how many other different areas, aside from artificial intelligence, you've studied. Who are some of the work and people who have inspired you who are coming from the fields other than artificial intelligence?
Well, when I moved to America in 95, 25 years ago, and when I came here, I was like a kid in a candy store. Like a lot of the authors that I'd read before, I could now actually meet them in person, and befriended some of them, and met all of these just brilliant people working cutting edge technology. Eric Drexler was one of them in nanotech, and then Roy Walford in calorie restriction. And, he was one of the pioneers in calorie restriction research. And I read his book, spoke to him, and so on. And that, very quickly decided that calorie restriction made a lot of sense. I want to be healthy and live as long as I can, hopefully long enough for Aubrey and people like that to, or our AI to help, solve the problem of aging. Found out about cryonics. Researched that made a lot of sense to me, so I signed up for cryonics.
That's
yeah.
Okay.
So if all else fails, it's safety net of unknown fabric. But
sure. Yeah.
it's the second worst thing that can happen to you is to end up in the duo. Just a lot of exciting things, and obviously a lot of people in AI that I met. But yeah, just super exciting to be part of it. But this was 25 years ago when I started, just here in California in particular, being exposed to all of this. Super exciting, but I would never have thought that 20 years later we would have made so little progress in nanotech, aging research, and AI, mainly for the reason that they haven't had funding.
Yeah, and also social adaptation keeps coming up, that just anything would work as well as a society that adopts it.
Yeah, or cryonics, that we have, just a few thousand, less than 2,000 people signed up for it.
Yeah.
Out of 7 billion, it just mind boggles,
Mm-hmm.
So yeah, that's quite a shocker. So, we just need to chip away at it and make it happen.
Absolutely. Peter, let me ask you the last question I ask all my guests, that if you come across an intelligent alien from a different civilization, what would you say is the worst thing humanity has done? And what would you say is our greatest achievement?
No, well, okay. I hadn't thought about that. Our greatest achievement, I think, is the parts of where rationality has actually, created a better society, has created science. So the scientific method, I think the American system, while obviously it's suffering, but basically having a lawful society that allows people to pursue their own interests but protects their individual rights. So that kind of civilization that we've created in the scientific method, I think those are our biggest achievements. And I think the biggest mistakes, I think, are superstition and religion. I think they've held us back tremendously. I think they're really very detrimental to mankind.